didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another?
Extra big-ass fries.
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase.
No.
I'm sorry you're having
Come
trouble.
on. My kids are starving.
Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we believe in freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, but above all, we believe in freedom of existence through self-reliance. This station is 100% listener-supported, and as a fundraising promotion, I have a kick-ass free gift for a $100 donation. 35,000 seeds. 25 years in the freezer. Long-term storable, 54 different varieties. So if food prices go crazy, it hits the fan, or if you just want to save tons of money every year by creating your own food like I do, grab our seed pack special. Just look for the banner on the homepage at freedomslips.com. Don't be a statistic. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. We need, as humans, to start taking care of ourselves and not depending on the megacorps to provide unhealthy, nasty food. Included in this package is also a DVD with 900 survival and off-grid living documents and the offline home canning how to do everything website, all on the DVD. So when you're growing all that food, you know how to can it, store it, preserve it, accept all these documents. So thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I hope that you will pick up this package and start learning to be free. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps and freedom is one seed that needs to be planted.
What are we doing live? Here goes an eternity.
All right, let's get it going. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go! Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. It is 10 p.m. Thursday evening, and we are here live on Studio A. Yeah, you've waited all week for the most cutting-edge topics and guests, and now it is time to deliver. That's right, it's the Stephen D. Kelley Show with your host, Stephen D. Kelley.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, good morning. Welcome to another edition of the Stephen D. Kelley Show. Vladimir, you need to turn down your background noise. Vladimir. Mute your microphone, Vladimir, please. Or there you go. Thank you. Okay. Very big show tonight. And I'm still getting some feedback from you, Vladimir, so maybe you can turn down your speakers. Okay. I'm sorry about that, guys. Anyway, tonight we are doing a show about the rise of fascism in the Ukraine. And gosh, this is the first time I've had this kind of feedback, so hopefully, Vladimir, you can fix that. It's sort of distracting me right now. Gosh. All right, you guys. I don't normally start off like this, but a little distracted. Anyway, this is an extremely important show tonight. We are doing nothing less than trying to stop a world war. And I have several guests with me tonight, and we are going to try to present some very important information in a point of view and a perspective that you will not see in the mainstream media, especially in the Western countries, the USA, the UK, etc. So wherever you're listening tonight, I want you to pay very close attention, and if there's anybody around that you'd like to ask to come and join you right now, this is the time. Bring them in here because this is a big deal. Before I get started and introduce everybody, I want to remind everybody that we are listener-supported radio. We do depend on your donations, so if you can visit our site support button on our homepage and donate anything you can, it's all very good. There's no such thing as a small donation. I also want to remind people that we have a very active chat room. If you're using a computer to listen to the show tonight, please feel free to go into the chat room. There's lots of room for people in there. Good people to meet, and it's a great way also that you can send us questions and be involved because myself and my producer Sean, we both monitor the chat room. I also want to remind people that we have a Facebook page. Please try to like our Facebook page. And I don't want to waste too much time because this is extremely important information. We will open the phone lines in the second hour, but because of the nature of the show and the nature of the types of the guests that we have tonight, I want you guys that call in. Of course, I don't want to discourage you from calling in, but I want to please advise you to keep it brief. Don't have any running diatribes, and be advised that the show tonight is anti-fascism, and I don't really see anybody coming in here to support this, but my patience level with any trolls or anybody that comes in to attack and try to disrupt the very important mission that we have tonight is not going to be on the air for very long. But that would be in the second hour, and the call-in number for that is area code 347-688-2902. If you're outside of the USA and you would like to join us, I recommend you use the Skype. And the connection for the Skype to join us tonight is going to be Freedom Screen. One word, FREEDOMSCREEN. Freedom Screen. And if that's not possible, you could also send me a contact request at my Skype, which is Stephen D. Kelley, and we'll do whatever we can to get you in here tonight that you could join us. All right, without further ado, and I also want to remind people that this show tonight is going to go for 2 hours, and when it's over, there is going to be a 2-hour break, and then I'm going to come back on for an additional 2 hours, a special additional broadcast. And the reason why we're doing that is because we're going to be bringing in more people from the Ukraine, and of course, because of the time zone, it's extremely early in the morning over there, and also be advised that at least one of our guests here has had to get out of bed at 4 a.m. to be with us here tonight. So we're very appreciative of that. So let me first start out by, I'm going to go down the line, and I want you, if you guys could just give me a brief, say your name for us, tell us where you live, where you're born, and give me just a real brief background on your association with this issue and what you'd like to accomplish tonight. We'll start with Manuel.
Yes, good morning from Germany. It's 4 o'clock, as you said. My name is Manuel Ochsenreiter. I am a journalist from Germany. I'm editor-in-chief of a small German news magazine. We are reporting extensively about geopolitical issues, and I have been myself during the referendum on Crimea in March. I was myself for around 1 week in Crimea. Our colleagues from partner magazines have been in Kiev and other Ukrainian cities. Myself, we were in the past already reporting about the situation in Syria, where I was myself a couple of times. We were reporting about the situation in Serbia and Kosovo, as well as Lebanon, where the geopolitical hotspots are. And we are now, of course, reporting extensively also about what is happening now in Ukraine, especially in southern and eastern parts of the country. Thanks.
Thank you, Manuel. Vladimir, hopefully we've got your sound working okay, but you're up.
All right. My name is Vladimir Suchan. I was born in Czechoslovakia from 1985 till 1994. I was working for the Czechoslovak Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then with my family we went to Canada. There I went back to school, and I did my master's and my doctoral studies at Carleton University. Then eventually we moved to the United States. So currently we are living in Ohio, and from 2001 till 2010 we lived in northern Maine. By education I'm also a political scientist. By heart I'm a Platonist. I also write Czech poetry, and I have been following closely the crisis in Ukraine, and trying to be something like one-man news agency for people who are interested in what is happening there.
Thank you, Vladimir. We're also joined by Masha, or Maria. I kind of like Maria better, but Masha, please join us and tell us about yourself.
Okay, so hello everyone, good evening, good morning, wherever you're listening. My name is Masha, and I was born in Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine. I moved to Canada when I was 6 years old, which was 1992, and I've been here ever since. I've been back a few times, and I'm currently here to basically give a couple of, a different perspective, probably because my family's over there. In particular, hotspot, my dad's originally from Slavyansk, and I have family there, currently my cousin, and my aunt in Crimea, and then I have family in Dnipropetrovsk as well, so that's still there. And I currently go to school for political science, still a student, and you can say I'm a compulsive Facebook poster when it comes to these political issues.
Very good. Excellent, Masha. Appreciate you being here. All right, you guys. The main thing we're trying to do tonight is we're trying to overcome some of the propaganda that's out there. And I'll tell you, this is not an easy task because the American public, at least the ones that I've talked to, and obviously I'm including everyone besides the American public, but they very much are following the media line and blaming Putin and Russia and suggesting that this is strictly an issue with expansionist issue because of Putin over Crimea, and I don't think people really understand the obligation that the Russian people have to be involved, especially since this is right next door to them and because this was one of their former republics, and that this is. There are so many Russian people in those areas of the south and the east of the Ukraine. One of the most important things that I want you guys to help the listeners understand tonight is the nature of the individuals and the entities and the powers involved in the junta that basically organized the coup. You know, the players, because I think, especially here in the U.S., a lot of people do not understand what fascism is, and they do not understand how apparently there's some very strong Jewish Zionist type elements that are involved over there, and a lot of people are extremely confused about how you could possibly have a Zionist fascist. It doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. So this is one of the main things that we're going to try to educate people about. So, Manuel, let's start with you. Could you describe for the listeners a little bit about the players and how the EU and NATO and the United States were basically funded the destruction of that country? Could you talk to us about that?
Yes, of course. I think the most important point of this conflict, by the way, as well of also other conflicts, but of this Ukrainian conflict, is that this is a geopolitical conflict. I think this is very, very important to understand. It is outspoken not about democracy. It's outspoken not about human rights. It's outspoken not about all these so-called Western liberal values, which we hear now in the Western mainstream media, in the propaganda. It's about pure geopolitical power, and it's a conflict it's a huge conflict we witness right now between the former old Eastern player, and which is coming back with Russia, and the West, which is somehow stopped in its expansion to the West. So when we track back the time a little bit and we look who was engaged in Kiev, in Ukraine, I can say now as a German, because we are reporting and researching extensively about those issues, we see a lot of German NGOs as well as foundations, party foundation of the big established parties. I think it's for the people who are researching and who are going into the issue, it's very well known, but maybe for the US American audience, not so much, that, for example, the political party of Vladimir Klitschko, who is playing now an important role, former as an oppositional politician and now as one of the representatives of the new Kiev group, which is governing there, that his party is so, well, we have to say a type of artificial product of a German political party, of the German CDU, the Christian Democratic Union. It's the party which is governing in Germany with the Chancellor Angela Merkel. So the political foundation of that party the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung was pushing and founding the party of Vladimir Klitschko. And we find those artificial products, those products everywhere in the new Kiev government. So in my opinion, we can say what is governing right now there is maybe a sort of proxy. It is, well, we will see how it develops. So we have on the one side, we have those powers there, and by the way, those powers are not just active in Ukraine. I was just in Bosnia, where also are riots on the streets. We will find there the same players as we found in Kiev. By the way, when we look closer on Syria, where the war is raging since 3 years, there were also the same powers active before that war broke out. So we can say that those powers, those so-called soft powers, those NGOs and foundations are changing the situation into a violent, dangerous atmosphere which can explode any time. And when we see now what is going on in Ukraine, especially in southern and eastern Ukraine, we know the horrible thing what happened a couple of days ago in Odessa, where people were burnt alive by the thugs, by the infantry, we have to call it, the illegal infantry of the Kiev government. They burnt people alive in the house because they had the wrong, in quotation marks, the wrong political opinion. We should be very alerted and very aware what is going on there. And when we see on the other side that the people in southern and eastern Ukraine, where the majority are ethnic Russians, Russian-speaking people, we're of course seeing what is going on in Kiev and who are very much worried. And they have all reason to be worried, and that they call for a type of federation, or even with the more radical parts call for a reunification or for a unification with Russia, is completely understandable when we see the background of all this. The point is that the West, in Western mainstream media, they report quite in another way about this, and this way the Western mainstream reports has very much often nothing to do with the reality. I can give you one single example. When I came to Crimea, I expected to see there, or I didn't expect it, but what if I look on the German and Western TV news of the mainstream news, I expected to see there a Russian military invasion. I'm pretty much sure that the US-American audience was seeing in the TV news, they saw tanks rolling over the Ukrainian border. I think Fox News was bringing that, as well as in Germany the news were bringing a Russian invasion on Crimea. But when you were on Crimea, you didn't see any invasion. And all the journalists, of course, it was not just me who didn't see that invasion, all the journalists didn't see that invasion. What we saw was a population extremely worried by what is going on in Kiev and extremely happy about the upcoming reunification with Russia. So the facts, the hard facts on the ground were contradicting the news coverage. And of course this happens in many other fields as well, but this is as one particular example how wrong we are informed by our mainstream media.
Thank you, Manuel. I appreciate that. I want to give everybody an opportunity here. Vladimir, can you go ahead and respond to the same question, please?
I think I agree with what Manuel said, that the profound causes of the current crisis in Ukraine are actually perhaps outside of Ukraine as such, although that should not absolve the Ukrainians themselves from a significant burden or responsibility for what is happening. And the fundamental causes are indeed connected to what Manuel called geopolitics. Although we are living in the 21st century with the internet, technology, and all these things, there are certain things, especially in politics, that have not changed. And we are dealing with a certain, I would almost say, obsession on the part of certain Western elites, for whom Russia, by its own existence and culture, is seen as an aberration or as an anomaly that needs to be taken out, or that requires a crusade And what is happening now in Ukraine is very much about Ukraine, but what is behind it is a campaign that is in one of its latest stages of this crusade, quite maddening and very dangerous crusade against Russia as such. In addition to this geopolitical dimension, what is going on is that we are also, I think, at a very late stage in what can be called the evolution of the system of capitalism under which we are living. And so the contradictions of the system and the dynamics that are working through the system are also pushing these militarized, geopolitically obsessed, possessed elites into this very dangerous adventure where we are indeed facing a dire real threat of a huge, large conflagration that can quickly get out of control if we don't raise our voices and try to stop it in the way in which many people were courageous and insightful enough to rise up against the desire and wish of the Obama administration to go and bomb Syria over the false flag chemical attack near Damascus on August 21st, and thereby turning U.S. armed forces essentially into Al-Qaeda's air force.
That's true. You know, I do appreciate you guys bringing up the issues with Syria, because that was an issue that was very close to home here at this network and in my show. Precisely, we did have a show about Syria that we believe actually was very instrumental in stopping the United States from getting involved on the ground over there. And that's exactly what we're trying to do tonight with the situation in the Ukraine. But you're right, from a political standpoint, what they're doing in the Ukraine is the exact same thing that they did in Syria, exact same thing they did in Libya, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a classic CIA operation. And with that, I want to bring Masha in. Masha, you know, having family over there and everything, and having been born there, I'm sure you have a very close perspective. Could you tell us anything about? I mean, in your own words, what would you like to add to what Manuel and Vladimir has said so far?
Well, I would just like to add that, well, considering what they said was quite, it was playing very well. The junta currently in Kyiv is definitely not in charge, and you can tell that, like, if the states were to, if America, like the U.S. government and everything, were to tell them to stop their campaign, for example, and what they're doing in East Ukraine, they would easily do it. I think that in a way they're, they have the campaign in order to, crush what's going on there. But it's also, I think, with Ukraine, it's more of a punishment for Russia in terms of what they did in Syria last year and how Russia pretty much stopped and vetoed their bombing campaign, and exactly what they were trying to do to Libya with a no-fly zone, etc. So that's pretty much what I have to add.
Yeah, I agree. I want to bring up something else. I mean, obviously there's a lot of things we want to discuss, and I want you guys' opinion, but people need to also understand from it's not just a geopolitical thing, it's obviously economic, and a lot of the natural gas and petroleum products that are coming out of Russia, pipelines are going through the Ukraine and servicing all of Europe. So clearly, this was meant to punish Russia, of course, for its involvement in Serbia, or not Serbia, but Syria, and also it's meant to try to bankrupt them, to try to force Europe into boycotting their natural gas products so that they could be sold gas from Iraq and what have you that's been piped into Tel Aviv. And of course, in the United States here, they've found massive deposits of natural gas, and they, of course, are fracking the entire world and collecting this natural gas. And the United States would like to be a large exporter of natural gas to Europe, and possibly Russia is a competitor that they need to get rid of. So there's many issues involved here. Do you guys can you guys respond on that issue before we go too deep in other directions? Manuel, you want to talk about that? Okay, Manuel. First of all, the European perspective and the fact that the Europeans are getting so much energy from Russia, clearly that's a big issue. But at the same time, I want your perspective from the corporations. There are so many corporations now that are doing business. German corporations, Siemens, companies like that are doing business in Russia. And I don't see them going along with the EU or with Merkel or any of this. So will Germany, do you think, rebel against this NATO operation? And talk to us about the oil and the economic aspects.
This is the last part of your question was a type of wishful thinking of a rebellion. But seriously, of course the economic part of all this is a very important role of any geopolitics. So this plays an important role, and when we look very closely, we have to say that within the European Union there is one state which is the economic and the economic spine of this European entity, which is, by the way, again, an entity which doesn't exist on behalf of the European citizens. It exists on behalf of European corporate. It exists on behalf of the interests of the U.S. administration, but it's not a thing which exists on the interests of the people. So when we look on this entity, we see that Germany is the economically most powerful entity. Germany is needed. The German economy is the engine of all this. If the German engine doesn't march very well, the EU entity is in big danger. Germany is the most important economy of the European Union. The most important energy partner of Germany right now is Russia. Many people didn't know that before the crisis, by the way, but indeed it's Russia. Russia is exporting a lot of gas to Germany, by the way, since a long time, even since again, people don't know that West Germany was importing gas from the Soviet Union before, and in any crisis they never stopped delivering gas. So when people say today, yes, it's a little bit a sort of panic they do right now in the anti-Russian propaganda in Germany. They say the Russians might stop delivering gas, we need other partners, but they never did. Even the Soviet Union never did. In any crisis, they never stopped exporting to us. So the experience is a good one. But anyway, so we have Germany as the most important partner, and we have the German industry as very important partners of the Russian industry. And of course, the industry is doing a type of silent rebellion against the politics. And the German government knows very well that anti-Russian sanctions, which are right now very much desired by the U.S. administration, by Washington, but that anti-Russian sanctions automatically will be anti-German sanctions. This is an automatic thing. It will be a boomerang for us. So this knows also the German government, and they know that if they do this, if they are now only obedient towards the West, they would punish their own industry, and the industry would punish, of course, again, the politics. But what we have now is that, for example, the head of Siemens was visiting Moscow recently, a couple of weeks ago, and the German state media, the German mainstream state media, was doing a sort of public interrogation of this person. So you don't have to be a pro-capitalist or a pro-industry guy, that you have simply to see what they were doing. They were trying to manslaughter him in a live interview. And of course he was defending himself, and he was very good. But we see that the propaganda, the mainstream news coverage is extremely adopting that extremist Western situation, even if it is genuine anti-German, to say it again like this. And by the way, they were doing this not just with Russia. We have the same thing when it comes to the German relations to other countries like Iran, for example. So we have there all of a sudden the same players. We have journalists who are working for state media and for big mainstream media, who think they become sort of state attorneys and judges at the same way. and they start accusing them, those people going on with business on to trade with those countries like Iran. So Germany is playing this important role. The media is taking side for the extremist Western side. The politics is very careful. Angela Merkel somehow knows that she cannot simply be obedient without damaging their own industry, and because, of course, this means automatically also damaging the European Union. The winner of that game, one might thought, why we are doing this right now, I think are some heads, not all, but maybe some heads in the Washington administration, because they know exactly that Germany, bringing away Germany from Russia is a clue thing. It's a geopolitical clue. When Germany gets close to Russia, it might be a danger of the future of NATO. Germany is as well the second biggest payer of NATO. Germany is the biggest US-American aircraft carrier. We have in Germany still around 50,000 US-American troops. Almost nobody knows that there are, since the 1940s, are so much troops. When the Russians were going away in the early 90s, after the German reunification, the American state here, they were modernizing the military bases and the military airports. So it's a crucial thing that Germany is like a dog obedient towards the US, and I think this propaganda for sanctions, for economic sanction, has also to do with keeping Germany close to the US and keeping Germany away from Russia.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that. I want to start bringing the subject into the topic of fascism, specifically the definition, the history, and your understanding. And Vladimir, I'm going to direct that to you, but first I want to bother Manuel a little bit, because he told me last night that obviously you're anti-fascist, and yet the powers that be would love to brand you as a neo-Nazi. Is that true?
Yes, there were always the attempts in the past. Of course, it is somehow ironic on the one side, but on the other side, it's very logical to brand somebody as a neo-Nazi. By the way, this is what the propaganda right now, the Western propaganda, tries to do as well with the Russians, particular Vladimir Putin, to put him into a tradition with Hitler and the Nazi Party. But this is a general thing, and this is what I think in Germany is a very powerful weapon, this bat in the hand, to mark somebody as a neo-Nazi as soon you don't like his opinion. Of course, because in my particular case, it has to do with the fact that I'm a very sovereignist journalist, so we are writing articles against a German membership in NATO. It is strongly against the European Union, as it looks now, not against the sort of European community, of course, but against the European Union. And of course, all those issues, and to take a particular anti-NATO statement brings you into the fields when you are considered by the mainstream as a Nazi, as a Bolshevik, as insane, as a lunatic. So you are outside of this so-called mainstream field which is accepted. And it's somehow very funny that especially those, and I think it's the same in US as in any Western country, that those who are doing the propaganda for the so-called open society, they say the open society is the most important thing in the West, but what they don't say is the open society just accepts people who are thinking like them. It's like freedom of speech, or those who speak as we wish. So it's a little bit a double speech thing. And we have been aimed in the past, especially me, because I was doing some presences and interviews on Russia Today, and it's a Russian foreign state TV channel which is broadcasting frequently, and I think it's a very successful channel. So especially liberal media houses in the United States as well as in Europe were aiming the Russian media, especially since a couple of months, since this geopolitical conflict becomes more and more hot, and to aim that channel, they are aiming different people who were appearing there, and I was one of them. But to be honest, I am until now it's not so much impressing that it would silence us.
Okay. Well, you're quite a troublemaker. Anyway, I want to move on to Vladimir and then Masha. Vladimir, you're quite an expert on fascism, and I'd like you to talk about that a little bit and try to educate the people about the nature of this and how it is resurrected today, and especially with respect to the Ukraine, if you could.
Well, it's a huge, big topic, and so where to start? I think first I'll probably start with what I once wrote in one of my conference papers. An interesting thing happened right after World War II in 1946. George Orwell, yes, a world-famous writer, authored an essay, Politics and the English Language. So barely 1 year after the end of World War II. And in that essay, very authoritative, influential essay, he already said that as far as he's concerned, fascism doesn't really mean anything, that it's a meaningless word that is being abused, used as an invective against anyone with whom we disagree or whom we don't like, that it has no meaning except for signifying something undesirable, and therefore that being so abstract and so hollow and so meaningless, it probably should not be part of any intelligent, good writing about politics. And this was written supposedly from the position of the new post-war left, right after World War II. And indeed, what seemed to happen to me, as much as I'm looking at it, was that the essence, the political essence of fascism has been almost abandoned or left to the side. And this led ultimately to an ideological political disarmament, or rather stupefaction or dumbing down of the left, while such people as Leo Strauss, who immigrated to the West thanks to a recommendation of Carl Schmitt, the leading Nazi theorist, started to teach eventually at the University of Chicago about the essence and nature of tyranny, and revealing some would-be political secrets which otherwise apparently were lost or denied to anyone else outside of the circles of the new initiates, who ultimately became known as Straussians and neoconservatives, who are now writing and authorizing the strategy that now leads to a possible catastrophe as far as Ukraine is concerned, and as far as the relation between Europe and Russia is concerned, and NATO versus Russia and the United States versus Russia.
Okay.
To cut this a little bit short, I think to understand what fascism is about does require critically reviewing many of the ideas that we have about politics, about capitalism, and about our system. And so some of the clues. The fact is that if you look at the history of capitalism, for most part, with the exception of maybe the last 150 years, although even that exception is not completely pure, the system had been perfectly compatible with slavery and slaves. Then what happened, thanks to the French Revolution and to the other ideas that started to emerge, let's say in the late 18th century, was the steady advance of nationalism, democracy, socialism, of more modest or more humane liberalism as far as it's possible. And then when these things started to happen, what started to emerge as a response was a reaction against it. And perhaps the most profound thinker, political thinker of that reaction is Friedrich Nietzsche. Yes, a German with significant Slavic or Polish roots. And if you look at his writings, he basically revived the importance or significance of looking at politics and at society through the lenses of masters and slaves. And very much then if you look at the political nature or purpose of fascism, and if you ask what was it exactly that fascism tried to achieve besides a world conquest or domination, it was first ethnic cleansing of the undesirables, and second, enslaving of the conquered populations. It was a vast, massive program aimed at creating a new slave labor or a new segment of mankind that would divide mankind into the new master race and the other part, the majority of mankind, that would have been enslaved under a fascist military dictatorship. And there is something in the nature of capitalism, actually, which was already understood by Adam Smith, that on the one hand, you have those entrepreneurs who are trying to create something productive and something positive and who are innovators and who are building things. And for them, war is bad because not always they can make a profit from it, or it can be destructive for them. However, there's also the other interest, usually associated historically, politically with the financial interest, for which it is not interesting whether how the profits are made or if the profits are connected with production and with general employment. For them, what is important is to ensure their essential usury. And ultimately, when the system of usury and debt is unsustainable, this financial interest feels compelled to resort to political dictatorship based on force, intimidation, terror, violence, and using brute force. And so the fact is that capitalism has never been just one simple thing. It has always had this dual feature, this dual nature, which already actually can be well documented if we go back to either Thomas Hobbes or Machiavelli. And so right now what we have is that what we call capitalism has been undergoing, at least for the last 40 years, this phase which many people started calling financialization of capitalism, which means that this interest, financial interest that is looking at the world through the idea of perpetuating debt, which means bondage, or certain new financial serfdom, started seeing as its natural ally and support groups that are militant, that would like to go on conquest and use terror and intimidation in order to recreate or bring back to society some form of serfdom. And so ethnic cleansing very much and racism and all the other things go along with this. And speaking of this, it just occurred to me that if you look at the management or mismanagement of Ukraine, Ukraine has been probably the most dysfunctional East European country after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And this dysfunctionality or huge gross mismanagement of Ukraine actually might have been deliberate and purposeful, because it seemed to me, and I was struck by the idea that what Ukraine was doing in terms of its social, economic, and political development was something that can be seen as imitating some of the bad features of the so-called Weimar Republic that existed in Germany before the two world wars. And we know ultimately what was the result of that sort of impotent, dysfunctional politics. It led to the rise of fascism. And so that's what I think we are seeing now in Ukraine, that there is this confluence between the financial interest of the system that is in crisis. It is a systematic crisis. It seems that many of the old solutions are not working. And from the point of view of the elites and also from the point of view of the masses that are often unemployed, desperate, these apparently simple solutions which fascism is presenting, they look attractive. And so that's, I think, what we are seeing. But at the same time, in order to make this happen, it needs to be sold to the public. And it's being sold as democracy, freedom, dignity, moderation, etc., etc.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. It's certainly being sold, and that's one of the reasons why we see so many young people getting caught up in this murder, and that's kind of shocking. I want to, Masha, I want to bring you in here, and everybody that's listening, I hope you guys appreciate the intellectual stature of this conversation we're having. Manuel and Vladimir, I'm sure you're intimidating poor Masha here a little bit, but Masha, I'd like you to give me kind of your now it's been a while, of course, since you've been there, but you've got family there. I want, in your own words, if you can tell me a little bit about the history of the Ukraine as you remember, and especially about what you've learned with the. I guess what I'm saying is, during the war, during World War II, there was a significant portion of the population there that actually fought with Hitler against the Soviet Union, and clearly some of those remnants seem to be activating today. Could you talk about that, or at least give us some sort of personal perspective from as you know it?
Sure, I can try my best. Okay, so I think I'm just going to go a little bit before. I know a lot of people are always wondering, well, why does Russia have this, Russia's always in Ukraine's business. They're always trying to, have this strong influence over Ukraine. And people don't really know the history, and I find that the Western media is trying to sever between, the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. So to our listeners, I just want to let you know that Kyiv is actually where Russia started off. It's called the Kievan Rus. And so Ukraine is essentially Russia's first home. And then over the years, everyone expands in their, every imperialist, every kingdom, every empire, expands and everything like that. So we essentially moved over to what is now Russia proper. However, East Ukraine and even Central Ukraine, they still have a large majority of ethnic Russians. So I know they tried to downplay how many ethnic Russians. They'll say 8 million in the current Ukraine. However, I would probably say that it goes well above that number. And when it comes to World War II, you have West Ukraine. There's 3 regions that we always say. It's called Galicia or Galiciano, we say it in Russian. And those were the regions that were fighting with Hitler. Actually, those are part of the, that was the region that had its own Ukrainian SS. And Stepan Bandera was the one who was in charge, and he was the Nazi collaborator. And today, that is what the right sector, that is their hero. And that we have a name for them, and we call them Bandera, actually, in Russian now, when in Ukraine. That's their nickname. And they were fighting in Ukraine and with the Nazis, and they killed several, not just Russians or Jews, they also killed Poles. And they revived this later on, and this Nazism has, continued over the years, and it's continued for the since World War II, and it hasn't went away regardless. And in Yushchenko's period, I found that sometimes when I was reading his stuff, he would say that even Russians weren't Slavic, for example, and there's like an anti-Russian propaganda campaign for a small region. These neo-Nazis don't necessarily represent a large region of Ukraine in the first place, but they're represented in the mainstream media as the majority. So that's what I find. And
excellent, Masha. I really appreciate that. You did a good job.
I hope so.
You did. All right, listen, you guys, we've only got a few minutes before the first break comes on, and then we're going to start taking callers selectively, of course. We had one caller already, area code 617, but I'm going to have to ask them to call back because this is too important right now to interrupt you guys. Relax, Masha, you're doing great. You're in some heavy company here. But the fascism thing, okay, again, Vladimir, I love your slaves and masters analogy because that perfectly represents what's going on with the wealth, the inequality of wealth, and the corporatocracy or oligarchy that seems to be taking over everything. I'd like to get to talk a little bit about the current leader of the junta, because there's some interesting aspects about him from a IMF, World Bank, Zionist standpoint. Vladimir Klitschko, of course, is very popular here in the West from his boxing career. So, a lot of us were disappointed to see what happened with him. So I guess, Manuel, I'm going to start with you, but I want to remind you guys we're going to have some music starting up within 10 minutes. So be advised, because I will interrupt you right when we get ready for the break. So, Manuel, can you talk to us about? All of you, I want you to all give us your impression of. Obviously, this is going to be a great question for the people that are living there right now. But can you talk to us right now about the chosen head of the junta? That who seems to be a contradiction of sorts. Can you talk to us about that, Manuel?
Yes, of course. But I wouldn't take out now one person in particular. I think this whole group is very interesting. And just by the way, I was very, very interested listening to Vladimir Sushan's words about fascism. By the way, I just would like to add one sentence, if this is okay for you. We have to see that the term fascism as well as the term of anti-fascism is indeed abused, especially by the West. I just want to remember that the wars, and I come back to Germany now, the wars where Germany was now involved within the last 20 years, especially the war against Serbia, were sold to the German audience or to the German citizens in Germany as anti-fascist wars. It was done by those, they were telling this is now an anti-fascist mission. When it comes to Syria, we Germans are told that this is an anti-fascist war against the Syrian government. So this anti-fascist term is abused in those conflicts by the side. I think this makes it very, very hard to debate, and because it's for many people more like a bat in the hand instead of a real scientific word. So I'm very thankful to Vladimir Sushan that he went down to the theoretical ground of the term. But when we look now to your question, when we look at the government in Kiev, we see a weird mix. We see those politicians I was saying who are more or less, we can say, on the payroll of the West. With on the payroll, I don't necessarily mean that they are getting now direct money from Washington or Brussels on their account, but that they were thrilled, educated, trained by Western foundations and NGOs and their staff, of course. We see the comeback of oligarchs. We have one oligarch who plays a very important role is Kolomoisky, for example, who are very often themselves, and this is what you were saying in the beginning, said what might sound a little bit ironic or confusing, that they are Jewish oligarchs, for example, or Zionist oligarchs who are supporting this. So we know that Kolomoisky, for example, is indeed a supporter of the Svoboda party, which is going on the streets and shouting claims against the Moscovites, the Russians as well as Jews. So we have liberal oligarchs, liberal in the sense of neoliberal economic ideas. I think Vladimir Sushan can talk a lot about that. We have hooligans. We have football hooligans supporting this. And what is always underestimated in this group of people, it's international terrorism. This is never said in a loud way, but when we look particular to the right sector is that violent group They call themselves ultra-nationalist, or they are considered as ultra-nationalist. They are themselves a group of different Ukrainian nationalist organizations, but there are people among who were fighting in the past, for example, alongside the Chechenian Islamists against Russia. They were, for example, fighting on the Georgian side during the Georgian War in 2008 against Russia. So there are people with quite a lot of international terrorism experience, which is, especially in Western media, never told like this and very much underestimated. And we have to see now the Kiev government as a sort of illegal junta governing those parts of Ukraine they really can govern, where Western money, Western or pro-Western oligarchs govern together with those gangs. I cannot find another word. These are criminal gangs. And when we see what is happening in eastern and southern Ukraine, when I was, for example, on Crimea, the people were there almost panicking because they heard always, there were rumors that the right sector is sending now fighters from Kiev and from other parts of Ukraine on Crimea to sabotage with violent acts against the referendum. So the people, the self-defense units we see now in the eastern and southern Ukrainian cities, as well as we saw in Crimea, they exist for a certain reason, for self-defense. So we see that these criminal violent gangs are spreading out, and they play a very interesting role. The right sector plays for the Kiev government exactly the same role as the Salafi and Takfiri gangs in Syria play for the so-called democratic opposition, which is acknowledged by the West, which is all everywhere in the West. So when the Takfiris, they are acting on behalf of this so-called opposition in Syria, but always when they commit a crime, the opposition says, "Oh, we cannot be blamed for this. We don't have."
Okay, Manuel, hang on just a second. Sorry for interrupting you, but that's the music. So we're gonna take a short break. You guys go ahead and mute your microphone during the break, and we will be right back in about 4 or 5 minutes, everybody. So please stick around. We'll get some coffee. Right back.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. The finder of lost children and missing persons, Monique Lassan, surveillance, civil and criminal investigations. I investigate.
No, I am the chosen one.
Do not underestimate the power of good, and do not dismiss the strength of the child.
Yes, every Wednesday evening on Revolution Radio, come join our very own investigatrix, Monique Lassan, with her private X-Files.
So you're the finder of lost children?
Private X-Files, every Wednesday from 10 to midnight Eastern, Studio B, on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
I realize it's very hard for you to take in. But it's your destiny to find the golden child.
Listen in to Journeys with JP, Tuesdays on Revolution Radio at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, with a variety of guests, each giving their unique perspective on their journey through to the now. Journeys offers you, the listener, a chance to share that perspective. Join me, JP, on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on Revolution Radio, simulcast with Wolf Spirit Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Hey folks, you got the Nighthawk here. Do you have a favorite host? Well, imagine if you will having all the broadcast shows from 2013 to listen to anytime you want. Awesome deal, huh? Anyway, so stop by freedomslips.com and order the entire 2013 library of your favorite host for just $30. Not only do you help with the station funding to keep us on the air, you also help the host because they get half of the net on every order. Also, we have Revolution Radio's all-time favorite shows all on one disc. The details are really broad, so you'll have to visit the website and go look at the details yourself. It's, again, www.freedomslips.com/season2013.htm. And get your favorites. First come, first serve, 7 to 21 days for delivery. Thank you. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps, including me. Later.
We've got to stop them! They're going to kill us all!
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We've got to stop them! They're going to kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you've got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio! Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the second half of the Stephen D. Kelley Show. I'm your host, Stephen D. Kelley. We're having a very, very important show tonight. Vladimir's echoing again. Okay, you guys. Tonight's show is about the rise of fascism in the Ukraine. We have some very important guests with us, Manuel, Vladimir, and Masha. After this show is over in an hour, we are going to take a 2-hour break, and then we are going to return for another 2 hours with hopefully some of the guests we have now and an additional few people, hopefully from the Ukraine itself, that can tell us what's going on the ground right there at the scene. I want to remind everybody this is listener-supported radio. We do depend on your donations, and if you enjoy what you're hearing and you want to help to keep the truth and spread the word and help us to fight for peace and information and truth, please give what you can and help to keep this station on the air. Also, I want to remind you that we do have a chat room that is very easy and to join and a lot of fun, and it's a great place to be and a lot of good people there to meet. I want you also to think about joining our Facebook page. I also have a Facebook page, and this is a great way to communicate with me. In fact, Facebook was the vehicle that I used to get these guests with me here tonight. Thank you, Vladimir, for all your help in rounding up these people. It was extremely helpful, and I want you all to know that when I do these shows, it's all very spontaneous. I go with the Spirit, and the Spirit told me that this needed to be done. So you are playing a very important role, and I want you guys to understand that we take this very seriously, and we really do hope that we are going to have a positive effect on this situation and minimize loss of life and certainly keep this from turning into a all-out nuclear war. So let's see. With that, I want to also remind people that now is the time to call in if you would like, 347-688-2902. And you can also Skype us using the word Freedom Screen. And again, this is such an important show that we want you, when you call in, to please be relevant and try to focus what you want to say. But again, now is the time, so we're certainly anxious to have you join us. And if anybody out there in Europe or the Ukraine or any of the areas that are affected, I know, Manuel, you have a lot of friends probably that in Germany that may want to join. Obviously, English speakers is what we need, but we'd like you to join us. So I think I'm going to go to Vladimir and then Masha. And Vladimir, we were just talking about the Prime Minister and some of the strange relationships between the IMF, the so-called fascists, and the Zionist entities that seem to be so active in this war, as well as the war in Syria that's going on right now. So, Vladimir, could you address that for us, please?
Yeah, that's an interesting and difficult question, because what we have is a league or a confluence of several forces together. Neoliberalism, or what is called neoliberalism, is coming to its maturity and making friends and allies with bandits and thugs, or people who are willing to shed blood and to kill just either for the heck of it, or if they are just told to do it, or if they are paid to do it. And in between those thugs, or these lumpen masses or mobs, and the neoliberal architects who started to emerge together with the so-called financialization of capitalism, sounds almost like the final stage of capitalism in the 70s, we have the intervening or mediating level representing by various oligarchs, bankers, so-called intellectuals, so-called journalists, cultural elites, etc. And so between those neoliberals who are sitting safely far away from all these places, like in Washington or in London on somewhere, we have the local oligarchs, thieving oligarchs, actually, as Obama himself called them in his speech in Brussels when he went there, I think, just about a month ago. And the media then is, what this is creating is a new alliance of sorts that at first sight doesn't seem to make much sense, that we have highly educated people who might have gone to Harvard, Yale, to other great colleges and universities, who are showing up constantly on CNN, Fox News, etc. Then we have local kleptocrats and oligarchs, very unsavory characters who got rich by squeezing rents out of gas being provided by Russia to Europe, or by plundering resources of their countries. And then for them, in order to do all this, they do depend on various local mafias, and now in Ukraine on paramilitaries. And what is interesting is that the connecting cement or bond between all these levels, the global level, the local level, and the level of the fascist mob, is provided by a certain ideology that indeed has many fascist features. And in the case of Ukraine, I think we can call it Banderism, which is like fascism with Ukrainian flavor, which, as Masha said, is essentially coming from one corner of Ukraine, which is the western part of Ukraine, which was the part that didn't abide for that long within the space of the so-called Russian word, or Ruský Mir, and always felt uneasy there and had a propensity toward hostility to Russians, to Russian civilization and Russian culture, which is the very characteristic for which I think the West or the United States was looking for someone who is Russophobic, who hates Russian culture, Russian civilization, and Russian as such, and they found them in Galicia or in western part of Ukraine. And what struck me as something really peculiar, and maybe I would actually appreciate if Masha can illuminate us on this subject, is that from the very beginning, when Ukraine became so-called independent with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, state symbols of Ukraine, as were adopted, were essentially symbols of Ukrainian nationalists or Ukrainian national socialists or fascists from World War II or from before, the colors, the trident, and all the other things, which I found quite stunning and amazing, given the fact that when the Soviet Union fell, all the elites essentially were previous communist elites. And so this phenomenon, how fast formal nominal communists became nationalists, embracing and supporting Banderas-type fascism, is something that I think is calling for explanation and for some additional discussion.
Thank you, Vladimir. Masha, we have a caller, 905. Do me a favor and hang on just a minute because I need to get to Masha first. So if you don't mind, please bear with us. Masha, Sasha had something that he wanted you to illuminate for us a little bit, but at the same time, you also have a personal connection that you are going to share with us.
Oh, well, I didn't know if you wanted me to do that right away, but no problem. Well, I just wanted to actually put this on a human level, basically. Let me go back to the fascism. I wanted to ask everyone if you can just imagine if all of a sudden you look outside and you see about 1,000 or 2,000 guys, 2,000 men or young men walking and marching and just saying like "Hail Hitler" down the street. And that's what I find that a lot of people aren't even looking at the human, at the human side. Is how would you feel if that was happening? You walk out and then these people are threatening you. So if any Canadians are listening, for example, if you're actually following what's going on in Ukraine, you can see that the East wants to secede. And there's a reason why, is because they want to ban the Russian language, and that was the first straw for them. That's why Crimea left. And if Canadians will understand, say for example, if Ottawa were to attack Quebec the way that the junta is attacking East and South Ukraine, the way they are, what kind of outrage the Western media would have. And instead, all you see is the downplaying of, whitewashing of these neo-Nazis. And I find that kind of despicable. Well, I find that despicable, first off, in the mainstream media. And people don't put themselves on that personal level, as I mentioned earlier. And the personal stories that we have are actually quite bad. I'm not sure if any of you followed the news the other day of a young woman being shot on her balcony in Slavyansk. Unfortunately, that was my aunt's friend's daughter. And something like that, if you can just imagine, you're just, you talk to your friend, how are you doing? Are you guys okay? No, my daughter was shot on the balcony. And like something like this. And my cousin who lives there, he was explaining that his friend almost got shot the other day just because the Ukrainian military is trying to crack down on, the junta's trying to crack down on what they're trying to do. So on the referendum and them trying to secede and them essentially fighting for their rights. So that's all I typically wanted to share before we started taking in calls.
All right, Masha, thank you for that.
Something to it?
Yeah, go ahead, Vladimir.
Yeah, what we have now here in Ukraine is a result of massive brainwashing, socialization, pressure exerted on these masses of the young men and all the other people. And the mechanism in its nature, in its essence, actually is quite simple. And the mechanism consists of thousands and thousands of repetitions of simple slogans. And these slogans are, I cannot, I think, reproduce it myself in Ukrainian at this very moment, feeling a little bit nervous, but essentially they have very simple and several slogans. One of them is, put a Russian on a branch, meaning hang Russians. The second slogan is, kill a Russian with a knife. And the other slogan basically means Russians get out. So, and these slogans have been repeated countless, many times over all those years. And those people were made to repeat mindlessly these slogans. And after a while, these people, I think, do become something like zombies and programmed. And ultimately, how many times can you say a simple sentence that actually means go and kill the other person before actually then you go and do it? And so the level of radicalization is very high. It has been pumped into society over all these years very intensively and deliberately. And now we have this zombified mass and mob guided by handlers or sponsors from behind the scenes, or maybe not so much any longer behind the scenes. And so it's not just about the Russian language. The fact is that the junta is running or trying to run Ukraine as a military dictatorship. And their program, which is quite clear to people in south and eastern Ukraine at least, is that their lives, their existence is in dire danger. Very immediate and present danger. And the Odessa massacre on May 2nd showed it very clearly. And so, although it showed it very clearly, then what we saw is that all the media and spokespersons in the White House, etc., are trying to make it look as almost innocent or inconspicuous or banal as possible, speaking of the banality of evil. So either the victims killed themselves, or it was a Russian provocation, or no big deal, let's move on. And we are in a moment right now where people justifiably are afraid that that was just the beginning and that we might expect another massacre like this, as long as there is no effective, significant resistance that would put a stop to it.
Scary business. Obviously, I think this is very reminiscent of Hitler with the situation in the Sudetenland and what have you, and certainly I would not suggest that this is manufactured at all. This is real, and certainly the Russians people are righteous in their desire to defend their fellow Russians. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring in our caller, area 905. What is your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Doug. I'm calling in from Newmarket, Ontario.
Hi, Doug. Would you like to ask a question?
Not so much. I was going to just add to the conversation if I could.
All right. If you could qualify your statements, do you have any background, any kind of connection, any family or anything in the Ukraine? What's your connection to this issue?
Sure. I visited in December. I have a few friends over in different cities throughout Ukraine and in Moscow as well. So when I went to December, the day before my flight, they were talking about possibly closing the airport. So I thought I wasn't going to be able to get in. But when I talked to a lot of my friends online, they were saying, oh, it's not so bad. It's just certain areas and it's not so bad. So I went ahead with it, and it was my first time there. My Russian is very weak, to say the least. So I ended up visiting with a friend in Kharkov for a few days. Took a train deeper into Kirovograd, and I didn't run into any problems whatsoever. People were nice. I kind of look the part, even though I'm English and I'm Canadian. I look like I belong, so a lot of people may have looked at me as one of them. And now my biggest concern is for my friends over there, the people that I visited, and the stories I'm hearing from them and that type of thing. So So I find that I'm getting quite emotional as time goes on, and it gets worse as far as just the level of anger that builds up within us when we see what's going on there. And I'm not even from there, so I can imagine how Nasha feels, for example, with family there. It's horrible.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your input, and you're right. It is a very emotional subject, and I don't think you have to be from the Ukraine to understand the gravity and the intensity of what's going on. So thank you for your comments. If anybody else would like to call in and join us again, the phone is 347-688-2902. Manuel, is there anything that's come into your mind here in the last few minutes that you'd like to add?
No, I mean, when we look on that conflict, I think what is a very, very important point, and we were already talking about the parallels to other conflicts, especially like Syria. I think this conflict now in Ukraine is for the West a very dangerous conflict. And when I mean a very dangerous conflict for the West, I don't mean it's very dangerous for economy, it's very dangerous for the political elite. I mean, it can really become a very dangerous conflict for anybody in the West, for the people living in Europe as well as for the people living in North America. I cannot imagine that, for example, the citizens of the United States are so happy with the fact that the US right now tries at least to increase the military presence in Europe and is heading towards an aggressive conflict. And I think it's a very important thing for any citizen. If you're a journalist, I think then it's more important than as well if you are working in another issue, to choose very well on which side you are in that conflict, because there is not such a side and this side. I think there's a good side and a bad side, and the good side is that side where you prevent the war and where you are not pushing for a war, where you are not doing warmongering. I think this is an important point for all those debates which are taking place now.
Okay, thank you, Manuel. We just had another caller join us. I want to bring in here and introduce area code 609. What is your name? Where are you calling from?
Vincent, I'm calling from southern New Jersey.
Yeah, hi, Vincent. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I joined the program half an hour late because I had an important phone call, but as soon as I hooked on, I was impressed by Vladimir with his obvious accent and his eloquent English. It's amazing to have somebody to be able to communicate at that level. As soon as he said Nietzsche, I thought, wow, they vilified Nietzsche and they said, Nietzsche, he was a reason that Hitler, started his whole regime and, and they made Nietzsche something that he wasn't, and it was the mainstream media thing. And we can blame mainstream media, and by the way, Masha, thank you too. We can blame mainstream media, but we know that that's all corporate controlled. I think the real blame goes to people who turn the television or the radio on and they listen to this mainstream media stuff. I'm all over the internet looking for more information, and what I see is how this whole thing was manipulated by, the United States, NATO, the IMF. I mean, it's always the same culprits, Israel. You don't know who has their hand where, and I'm not saying that I know what we can do about that, because you have a dumb global population listening to dumb, media moguls that are out there. These people that get on television and they look pretty, and they're all wearing like the blue tie, and the pastel shirts, and the women are made up to be gorgeous, and what I see going on there, I just saw that thing at the Union Building, what they did there, and I saw a guy pointing the gun. I know, and I don't watch television, and I don't listen to mainstream radio, but I know that guy pointing a gun at that building and firing shots was not on the mainstream media. And I don't know what you do about it, and I'd really like to hear what Vladimir and Russia think about what the alternative is to wake people up, because they'd rather just wake up in the morning. I know people that wake up in the morning, They turn the television on. They go into a trance. They drink their coffee. Whatever they hear, that's reality. And if you try to talk to them, you watch their eyes glaze over. What's the solution for that?
All right, you guys, I want you to respond if you have anything positive, but I do agree, Vincent, this is a really tough battle that we're up against because the media has done such a good job of programming people and dumbing us down. So, I'm hoping to hell that this doesn't just go over everybody's head because clearly the issues here are very complex.
Well, let me just make this comment.
But we got to hurry, Vincent, because we got to be fair. Go ahead, finish.
I'm 65 years old, and I've been saying to people for years and years and years, the biggest problem when they complain about the way the world is, I say the biggest problem is that your participation ratifies everything they do. When you say, my government, my representative, it's not your government, he's not your representative. These people have no interest in you whatsoever. And whatever you do to participate, I don't vote because I'm not going to participate and ratify this stuff that they do. And I think people that are really concerned need to back away and say, how can I stop participating and ratifying everything? If I could stop using Federal Reserve notes, I would. And I do a lot of bartering,
Okay, Vincent, you struck on a key term here. The Federal Reserve is certainly a big issue. You're talking about Rothschilds and IMF World Bankers. So
whoever they are, the thing is, it doesn't matter who they are. What matters is that when you do the things that they rely on for ratification, whoever they are, I don't care what their names are. You are supporting a system that is made to enslave you, and that gets back to the Nietzsche thing. I used to carry the pocket Nietzsche around with me and read it because I was so enthralled by what this guy saw, the will to power. This is about the will to power, and people are powerless, and they thrive on their powerlessness.
All right, listen, I've got to cut you off here because we got to get back to the guests.
Thank you.
Thank you for your call. Now, you guys, who would like to basically address what he brought up? Vladimir, I think you'd probably be the best person to talk about that.
Yeah, I agree that in its essence, fascism also can be understood or defined as the will to power, regardless of truth, justice, equality, democracy, humanity, in a way that doesn't recognize or doesn't want to recognize any limitations and restraints. And I think also in this respect, the key word which the caller from New Jersey mentioned in his speech was the word trans. And the fact is that all of us, to some extent, are at some point and at some level in a certain mental trance, which means that the ultimate power, or both the ultimate and first form of power is mental. It's power over the mind. And here, an interesting connection. The conversion of the United States, or flip towards the dark side, as far as fascism is concerned, started right after World War II as the Cold War erupted. And there was a certain program called Paperclip, which meant that Nazi leaders, scientists, and their best minds were imported over to the United States. And there were two main classes of these Nazi scientists and leaders. The first one helped the United States to develop its missile, rocket, cosmic program. But the other group, they were people who were experts in mind control, which ultimately then resulted in the so-called MK Ultra program and various derivatives of that. And in some way, neoconservatives are also profiting and using this sort of programming or mind control, which essentially, if you look at the signature of it, is all about mental enslavement. And it can be done in various ways, to various extent. And in some way, the programming or brainwashing of some of the thugs or fascist mob in Ukraine is also part of mental systematic mind control. And so the question is how to get out of this trance. So the basic prerequisite for any positive change is to develop certain immunity or filter to this mind programming and mind control. And it's not easy because our existing education, the way it is pursued and developed, doesn't help. Actually, often it is part of the problem.
Okay, I want to get back to the banking issue, specifically the Rothschilds and their control of the world banks, the central banks, as well as the Federal Reserve here in the United States. I think ultimately there hasn't been a war that has not been financed by the Rothschilds and instigated by the Rothschilds in several hundred years. So clearly that is the problem. I mean, certainly here in the United States, we've had two presidents assassinated over their attempts to try to remove the Federal Reserve System here in the U.S. And clearly I think that all of the problems, especially the economic problems that we face here and everywhere else, are the result of the Rothschilds family is essentially stealing 98% of the entire wealth of the world and hoarding it away somewhere. So I understand that Vladimir Putin has been very successful in removing the Rothschild international banking cartel influence from Russia, and certainly this is one of the reasons why these these entities are so anxious to destroy Vladimir Putin as well as Russia and reinstitute a Rothschild-controlled central banking system in that country, as well as the Ukraine and Syria, obviously, and Iran and several other countries. Can we focus on that a little bit? Anybody want to, Manuel, do you want to talk about that?
I mean, there's one important point when it comes to the international finance sector, and this is it's one of the elements of, let us call it this Western war machine. I think the financial sector is a very important element, and when this element is attacked itself or it is criticized, it defends itself. We had this, I want just to give one example that you see how these things functioning. We used to have in Germany so-called Monday demonstrations, Montagsdemonstrationen. Now, since several weeks, these are demonstrations for peace. Maybe a little bit like our show here. So people come together to protest against the warmongering coming from the West against Russia and talking for peace. These are very different people. You can say these are citoyens, normal. They are coming conservatives together with left-wingers. It's a mix. These people are simply concerned. So one of the organizers or the organizer of this was criticizing the influence of the banking sector on that warmongering and on or against the profits which are done by those wars, and he was in particular mentioning the role, for example, of the US American Fed, but as well of the whole Wall Street. So within hours, this person was attacked, and now we are again at these issues like fascism and anti-fascism. He was accused to be an anti-Semite because the argumentation line of the German mainstream media until today is criticizing the financial sector or criticizing Wall Street is automatically anti-Jewish ressentiment, anti-Jewish cliché, and has to be attacked. So this person was defamed, if we want to say it like that, as a fascist, and the banking sector was imposing itself with his armies of journalists as an anti-fascist force. So we can say that who attacks the financial sector from what perspective ever he tries to do that will face an enemy which is really able to destroy you in any social way, in the way of your job, it's defaming you, it's putting, if we want to like that, a laser aim on your forehead for others to attack you. So I think this is an important detail of what we are talking about, that there is a powerful player in this game, which is most probably not really a game, but there is a powerful player in that game which is prepared to defend himself, maybe to death. We don't know how far that would go, but when we see the investments in wars, the investments in the arms industry, the investments in conflicts, we have to say, then we can say, yes, this sector is for profit, it's going to the death of others.
Okay, thank you. I should probably point out, and obviously this is not an anti-Jewish thing by any means, but it was the Rothschilds that were fundamentally responsible for the formation of Israel, creating the Zionist entity over there. So whether or not that is an issue, that's for everybody else to discuss. You guys, I'll tell you this. We've got. Yeah, Vladimir, please do. Go ahead.
So, speaking of money, etc., from a political, from the point of view of political philosophy, money in itself is a form of mind control. If you look at it, that's what it is. It's managing society at a macro and also micro level through ciphers and signs, which guide or direct how we think and what we think is possible, and how the world works. When, in its essence, these signs are arbitrary and artificial. But generally, the system is run in such a way so that we would not see the artificiality and the arbitrariness of the system as such. Then the financial interest comes in this way. The financial interest essentially is a machine that produces indebtedness and debt. When the debt is being called, or when the debt becomes oppressive and huge, we need to ask what happens then. The debt, or its repayment, or repayment over and over, needs to be enforced. And how the debt or the financial interest then is enforced and made valid by the power of the state. And what does it mean to enforce it? It means to use force, violence, or war. And that's ultimately, if the financial interest is the one that is leading and dominating, inevitably there is this tendency on the part of the financial interest to generate war as a way of enforcing a will to power that is essentially artificial and arbitrary, and that does not produce any tangible goods in itself. It is essentially a form to tax others and to create indebtedness, and without force or the power of the state, this will would not be able to be exercised. So that's also why one way of how to look at fascism is that the essence of fascism actually is war. Fascism is about war, as long as fascism can afford it, as long as there is no resistance, and if fascism can get away with it. So once you get fascism, fascism produces war, it wills war, it wants war. That's also why Yatsenyuk himself defined just a while ago, right after the Odessa massacre, his government as a war government, and he declared that as far as he's concerned, or the junta is concerned, they are at war. They are already at war with Russia, and of course with a backing and support and prodding from NATO and from the US. So fascism actually means war. It wants war, and ultimately, it's some people want war for its own sake. For others, that's the will to power, and that's what fascism does and what fascism serves.
I want to make a couple points here real quick, at least from my perspective. A few things. This is almost like the island where somebody will come with a male and a female goat and put them on the island, and then they'll come back 10 years later and the island will be filled with goats, and they'll harvest all the goats and they'll leave just two, and the process will start over. That's kind of where we're at right now. Here in this country, and I'm sure a lot of the world leaders in the other countries have done the same, but here over in this country, we have built a massive bunkers, a network of underground bunkers for the elite and the ultra-wealthy here in this country. And this system of bunkers is definitely something that was talked about in the protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. They mention that in one of the chapters. They call them the Metropolitans. But to me, it almost seems like these world leaders that are acting so suicidal and trying to bring us into a nuclear war situation, it's clear that they would only be doing this because they feel that they are going to survive and that they could ride this out, and that their function is to basically kill off a large percentage of the world's population. I believe it's something like 6.5 billion people that they would like to exterminate. So, you have to understand that ultimately, if you look at their motives for trying to cause such a ridiculous, horrendous catastrophe, it's because they feel secure in the knowledge that they will survive and that they will live like kings. There's that master-slave situation. Obviously, the slaves outnumber the masters now in such a way that they could never have full control. So they'd like to reduce the world's population down to something like 500 million so that the elite could have a much easier control situation. Let's see, Manuel is back. Vladimir, you just fell off for a little bit. Masha? Okay, good. I'm
speaking of the demographic side of the things. There is one stunning, nasty fact about the post-communist transformation of Ukraine. What happened in Ukraine is unprecedented. Ukraine became independent with some 54 million people. 23 years later, Ukraine went from 54 million people down below 45 million people in 23 years, which is, if I'm not mistaken, something like 20% of the population. I understand that some people might have moved out, but still the demographic decay or loss is absolutely unprecedented and stunning. Ukraine lost in 23 years of its supposed peace more people than it lost in World War II. In World War II, Ukraine lost 7 million people, yes, in about 4 years, that's true, but it was a massive warfare. But now, in 23 years, they lost around 10 million people in terms of its population, and right now, Ukraine has entered a very turbulent period of an evident civil war with massacres like the one that happened in Odessa on the horizon.
Hey, Vladimir, just for the sake of historical accuracy, during the Bolshevik period, I believe that quite a few people were exterminated in the Ukraine under, I believe it was Stalin. Could you guys talk about that briefly? Vladimir, how about you? You want to touch that one?
That's something. There's a study that actually says that there is a whole propagandist literature developed around the starvation in Ukraine, which was supposedly done deliberately by Stalin against Ukraine. The fact is that Stalin himself was from Georgia. He was not an ethnic Russian, and it seems that actually the numbers of people who were killed and terrorized under Stalin has been many times overblown in the West. There were casualties that were significant, but as far as I can tell, the number in no way are in the magnitude which is normally being reproduced and recycled here in the West. And in Galicia, in Western Ukraine, they didn't suffer the fall in the harvest or in the crops as the peasant population did in Eastern Ukraine, where actually they were these farmers depending on agriculture. That's at least as far as I understand it. And till Ukraine gained independence, Ukraine's population was increasing by 300,000 people every year for the last 10 years of the existence of the so-called Ukraine Socialist Republic. And then, under the duress and stress of privatization, liberalization, post-communist mistransformation, Ukraine started heavily losing its population. And there is no other country, as far as I know, in Eastern Europe which suffered such a huge loss of population when supposedly enjoying freedom, free market economy, etc.
Okay. I want to ask you real quick if you could tell us, in your opinion, what the actual number of people that may have been starved or killed in that way over there in the Ukraine under Stalin. Do you have a number?
I don't have it on my fingers, and I would refer this question to Mario, to Masha.
Masha, can you answer that question? You still with us, Masha?
Yeah, sorry. Well, they range. Some people claim that it's 8 million, and honestly, there's a lot of there's a lot of sources that say that it's a hoax. It's technically not there because there's no evidence for it. So, I'm on the fence about whether it's true or not.
Well, let me just say this. Obviously, propaganda or otherwise, so many people, especially here in the West, are focused on this 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, and then you just told us that 7 million Ukrainians died just as a result of combat. So clearly,
5 million out of these 7 million were civilians.
Okay, yeah, it always seems that way. But we could agree now, Masha. I guess I'm going to defer to you, but whether or not obviously this perspective that it was a hoax, that the Bolsheviks did not do this, certainly that's a debatable point, and that's nothing that I want to get involved in tonight. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that the Ukraine has lost as a result of World War II and the result of the what happened under Stalin, possibly a very significant amount of people, far exceeding that number that is used so often to talk about the suffering of the Jews. So clearly, I think they're not getting the airtime. The Ukraine. I mean, if we could all agree that 7 million people died in World War II, mostly civilians in the during over there in Ukraine, that in itself, I think, is a far greater Holocaust than what is we're constantly being reminded that Hitler allegedly did. Do you want Masha? You continue with that, can you please? Oh, Manuel wants to say something. Go ahead, Manuel.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we should be generally very, very much careful when we look for justifications in the past. And I know that, for example, in Western media, they are now saying, yes, there was this so-called Holodomor, this starvation of the Ukrainians, and this is why they hate the Russians. So this is the general media line. So we have to understand they hate Russians because Stalin did do this and that. I think this is a much too easy thinking, and to justify things happening right now with stuff which happened or which is told what happened in the past, that doesn't work out. I will give you one example. In Germany, we have a culture of remembering the Holocaust and World War II and the casualties of World War II. This culture of remembering became in the mainstream and in the mainstream politics more and more symbolized. It's empty. I can tell you why. Those politicians, exactly those politicians who knee down at monuments and who are delivering speeches how much they remember the horrible things which happened in the past, exactly those politicians don't have one single tear for those people who burned to death in Odessa. They don't care about them. So this has nothing to do that somebody who is thinking and remembering what happens in the past, that he has a sensitive understanding for what's happening in the present. In contradiction, it can be a sort of insurance for them show off, to show, yes, we are on the good side, we are the good ones. But at the same time, they are the ones, I mean, the established politics in the West are somehow the masterminds of those thugs and criminal gangs who were committing those crimes, and they will hopefully not commit such crimes in future, but we see a genocidal energy in what happened in Odessa, and this energy is present, and you will not find in Western mainstream media and Western mainstream politics politicians or journalists who have the guts to criticize what happens. They're in contradiction. What I learned now in Western mainstream media is the people in Odessa burned themselves to death. And I always make the cynical joke, yes, of course, that the Christians in Syria crucify themselves, and the Alawis, they behead themselves in Syria. Yeah. Of course, it has nothing to do with that. So it has, when we look for these historical parallels, it might be interesting, and of course to get a lecture in this, but it tends to justifications, and it tends to insurance yourself that you are on the good side, but it doesn't have, unfortunately, any effect.
Thank you, Manuel. I appreciate that. I agree with you. The past is certainly no justification for what's going on today. And but one thing that you did kind of remind me is when you look at the evil nature and the bloodthirsty feelings that seem to be being perpetrated. Ultimately, I like to think that this is a satanic influence. I don't know if you people are believe in that sort of thing, but I see that quite a bit actively, and especially here in this country with the Masons and some of the secret societies that we have running things behind the scenes. We've been joined by Just in Time, another producer here at the network, and I'm sure he has something interesting he'd like to add. What's up, Justin?
Great show, Stephen. I'd like to thank everybody that's joined your show tonight and taken the time out. I was really touched by what the lady said, giving an example. Everyone's talking about fascism, of picturing 2,000 men in uniform marching down your street, repeating. And that's what the one caller talked about most, the repetition on television. And I would just like to say to everybody out there, you're facing fascism on a daily basis by turning that television on. I would say make a stand against the corporations and fascism itself. Make a start tomorrow, get on the phone, and have that cable, dish, or satellite TV shut off.
Thank you, Justin. I think that is very, very wise advice, and clearly, like you were talking about the mind control and the MK Ultra, we could spend a lot of time talking about that, especially we do on this network. We talk about that sort of thing very often. I want to let everybody know, though, we are getting down to roughly about 8 minutes or so. Is that right, Sean? About 7 or 8 minutes?
Yeah, about 5 minutes, actually.
5 minutes? Okay, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But again, you guys, everybody listening, I want you to know that I'm going to try to get these people to come back in 2 hours from now. We'll have another show. I'm going to call it Part 2, and we'll have a few more guests. I want everybody to have at least a minute to give some final words. But before you do that, I want to thank Manuel, Masha, and Vladimir for being here and taking the time. And I pray to God that our efforts tonight have been helpful and that we have made an effect. And I certainly want to thank everybody out there that's listening and everyone that's in the chat room also. So we'll start with Manuel again. If you could just briefly kind of wrap up a statement before we close this out.
Yes, it's very, very quick said. I think what I said already, everybody's responsible for himself and for the media consume program he's using. And I think in those conflicts, and especially in the conflict in Ukraine, I think you cannot stand anymore neutral. And those who say stand neutral and stay objective, in reality they are not. So we should be very careful with those people. So we should have, or we should encourage the people, or we should have the courage ourselves to take a very clear point of view in these things and to speak out what is to criticize and to speak out who to support in that conflict. I think this is maybe one of the most important things right now, although it came a little bit out of fashion, especially in the West, to stand up and to say what you think.
Well, we're certainly not afraid of it. Thank you, Manuel. Vladimir, do you have something you'd like to add real quick?
Tomorrow, Russia and other people are celebrating May 9th as Victory Day. And yes, when I moved to the United States, I noticed that when it comes to World War II and the suffering, it's reduced mainly to the Holocaust and to the suffering of the Jews, and the fact that people of the Soviet Union suffered by far the greatest casualty in World War II, the estimates of which range from 20 million to 27 million, seems to be an almost unknown and strange fact that doesn't show up on the radar or on the minds of the Americans. So the amount of destruction and suffering which the collective mind of the Russians and former Soviet people have on their minds is something that I think is completely escaping awareness or notion of what people were led to think or assume about World War II. And so now when fascism is making a comeback to Ukraine, we need also to understand how it is perceived by all these millions of Russians or other former Soviet people in that area. And I think the same is also happening, for example, now in the Czech Republic. Many people are really upset and are rebelling against the current political elite and the media that are peddling the line that is demonizing Russia or Putin and that tries to make it into a very simple black and white conflict between the benign West and NATO. And
Vladimir, we're almost done. I want to give Masha a few seconds to say something before we cut off. Again, you guys, I want you to try to come back in 2 hours, so hopefully you'll be able to do that. Masha, final parting words for everybody? Come on, Masha, unmute the microphone.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add that what Manuel said, and it's like the Western media always gives us one side, which is typically, a lot of news channels do the same thing. However, I always find that in the West, everyone seems to listen to just CNN or like MSN or.
Well, that's it, Masha. I'm afraid that's it. Okay, I hope you guys will join me in 2 more hours. I want to thank you very much, my guests. You were excellent, and I think we're going to probably have another show, and I'm going to want to bring you back in very soon, and hopefully you will want to do that for me. Thank you, everybody that's listening to the show. Thank you to everybody in the chat, and we will have the show on YouTube. And again, thank you so much, and please try to join us in 2 more hours. Thank you very much. God bless. Good night.
Thank you.